had learned early in life how to exist without being noticed. It wasn't about hiding, it was about observing. At 29, she moved quietly through the hallways of the Nevada Military Research Base, wielding nothing but a mop, a bucket, and an air of invisibility. Most people never even glanced at her. To them, she was the cleaning lady, the background noise of their meticulously controlled environment. No one questioned where she went or what she did. That was exactly how she wanted it. Her shift started at midnight, a time when the base transformed into a different world. The lights were dimmer, the air heavier, and the scientists' chatter softer, measured. Security guards patrolled the same routes they had memorized, eyes scanning the hallways but missing the quiet movements of a person who appeared utterly inconsequential. Moved like a shadow, silently sweeping, mopping, and dusting, all while her eyes drank in every detail. The patterns of surveillance cameras, the locations of emergency exits, the routines of every night shift worker. The base itself was intimidating. Towering walls topped with razor wire enclosed a labyrinth of hallways, labs, and offices, all buzzing with secretive energy. Heavy steel doors, each with a biometric lock, opened to rooms that smelled of antiseptic and metal. Machines hummed continuously, their purpose inscrutable to anyone without clearance. And yet, walked these halls freely, armed with only the badge that allowed her to clean. Every room she entered, she memorized. The number of computers, the placement of fire extinguishers, the routines of personnel. These were the details that no one thought mattered, details that would one day save lives. It had been 3 months since had taken the job. She had been careful, choosing her moments, listening more than speaking. She understood that invisibility was power in itself. People underestimate what they cannot see, and she had perfected the art of being overlooked. Some nights, she lingered near labs under the pretext of sweeping the floor while her ears picked up snippets of conversation. She heard technicians arguing about odd readings, scientists whispering about codes she didn't yet understand, and guards grumbling about mysterious deliveries arriving at odd hours. Every detail was filed away in her mind. Most people thought was dull, quiet, and unimportant. The cleaning staff were often treated as afterthoughts, a necessary nuisance in the base's grand operation. But that assumption was exactly what made her invisible, exactly what gave her freedom. She noticed when Doctor, the lead scientist on the floor, stayed late at his terminal, eyes darting over encrypted files. She noticed when Colonel, the strict base commander, inspected security logs that no one else seemed to care about. She noticed when the shipment trucks arrived at 2:17 a.m. every Thursday, their contents labeled only with codes. Had learned to read subtle movements, the pauses and hesitations in voices, the way people avoided certain areas, the way security cameras tilted just slightly to cover blind spots. She noted patterns, anomalies, and behaviors. Her past had trained her for this. Though she couldn't reveal it, she had been a cyberintelligence analyst once. A former operative, she had infiltrated organizations far more dangerous than a military research base, gathering information, retrieving data, and staying invisible. But after a mission went wrong, she vanished from the system, taking on this mundane role as a cover. No one suspected that the mop-wielding janitor was once someone who could manipulate entire networks with a single command. Tonight was no different. She wheeled her cart down Corridor 12, past the lab where the project files were stored, and around the corner into the empty cafeteria. The smell of cold coffee lingered in the air, and the faint hum of a refrigerator was the only sound. She wiped down tables, rearranged chairs, and listened. A faint beep echoed down the hallway, the kind only sensitive ears could pick up. It was a subtle change in the rhythm of the base's heartbeat, a minor disruption that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But she noted it, stored it, and moved on. She paused outside Lab 7B, pretending to mop the floor. Inside, a group of scientists whispered urgently. "It can't be tested at full power yet," one said. "If we do, the blackout radius could be catastrophic." Pulse quickened, though she remained calm. She couldn't fully understand what they meant yet, but she knew enough to recognize danger. She jotted mental notes. Project, a device capable of silencing communications, alarms, and possibly more. The words catastrophic and full power carried weight. She would have to investigate further, but she needed caution. Visibility was her enemy. As she moved down the hallway, she caught the reflection of her face in a polished stainless steel door. A thin, determined face stared back at her, calm yet resolute. She didn't look like a former intelligence operative. No one would suspect her, but the years of training were still present beneath the surface. Every careful movement, every silent observation, every unnoticed action had a purpose. Had chosen this job for a reason. To be invisible, to gather information, and to be in the right place at the right time. Back in the utility closet, she examined her notes. The base's operations seemed routine on the surface, but beneath there was tension. Supplies arrived late, technicians whispered, and security logs were being manipulated. Understood that nothing was as it seemed. Her instincts, honed from years in intelligence work, told her that something bigger was happening. She needed proof, but she also needed patience. The first step was observation, and she had that in abundance. Hours passed. Guards made their rounds, scientists typed away at computers, and the hum of machines filled the night. Moved through the base silently, unnoticed. Each footstep, each sweep of the mop, each adjustment of a chair was a calculated act of camouflage. The invisibility she cultivated was her shield, her tool, and her weapon. She knew that one misstep could blow her cover, but she trusted her skills. She trusted her patience. As dawn approached, the base would return to its day-shift routine, and she would disappear into the shadows again. For now, though, she had gathered enough observations to start connecting dots. Someone believed her invisible, but soon, what they ignored would become undeniable. The cleaning staff nobody saw had begun noticing everything, and once she started acting, the entire base, and perhaps the world, would realize that invisibility was never weakness. The night ended as it began, silent, unnoticed, and full of potential. Wheeled her cart out through the service exit, a quiet figure blending into the desert's chill. Her shift was over, but her mission was only beginning. In the quiet corridors of the Nevada base, a storm was gathering, and it was led by the one person no one thought to watch. Returned to her small, sparsely furnished apartment, the hum of the desert night outside her window. The world beyond the Nevada military base continued unaware of her presence, of the secrets she had glimpsed in shadowed corridors. To anyone else, she was a quiet, unremarkable cleaning staff member, slipping in and out of the base like a ghost, but carried a past that no one suspected, one filled with precision, danger, and intelligence operations that few could comprehend. Before the janitorial job, had lived another life, a life meticulously scrubbed from public records. She had been a cyber-intelligence analyst, recruited for her exceptional aptitude in codes, encryption, and covert operations. Governments relied on people like her to infiltrate hostile networks, to extract information without leaving a trace. She had done it all. Surveillance missions in foreign territories, extraction of critical documents, infiltration of secured facilities, and neutralization of digital threats. Every mission demanded patience, invisibility, and nerves of steel, skills she now wielded in a different guise. A mission gone wrong had changed everything. A classified operation in Eastern Europe involving a rogue intelligence faction had ended with unexpected exposure. Had survived, but her existence became a liability. She disappeared from the system, erased from databases, and assumed a new identity. She chose the cleaning job at the Nevada base carefully. It gave her access, proximity, and the perfect cover. People would overlook her. People would underestimate her. And yet, it placed her near the very operation she had once vowed never to touch again. The high-security labs where Project was being developed. The apartment she returned to was modest, just enough for her to exist outside the watchful eyes of the base and the government. A single lamp illuminated her sparse desk, where she kept notebooks, digital files, and scattered photographs from her past, reminders of a life she could never reclaim. Each item told a story, yet she did not dwell. Dwelling was dangerous. Her mind was trained to act, not to linger. She replayed the events of the night, the conversations she had overheard, and the peculiar behaviors of the base personnel. Her instincts told her that this was bigger than just a rogue experiment. It had the potential to affect millions. Remembered her training vividly. Years of missions had instilled in her a sense of patience and meticulousness. Intelligence work required a mind capable of seeing patterns where others saw chaos, understanding intentions hidden behind casual words, and moving undetected through environments bristling with danger. Her training had also taught her how to manipulate perception. Sometimes, the best disguise is invisibility. By appearing insignificant, she could observe, record, and eventually act. And that is precisely what she intended to do at the base. Though she had assumed a quiet life, her skills had not diminished. The base was a perfect playground for someone like her. It was a world of routines, of predictable human behavior, of machines and systems begging to be understood. Every moment she spent unnoticed was an opportunity to learn, to connect dots, and to prepare. She knew the dangers. If someone discovered her background, if someone recognized the operative beneath the janitor, she would face deadly consequences. But was confident. Her invisibility was both shield and weapon. Her thoughts drifted to Colonel, the base commander. He was cautious, exacting, and calculated, traits that made him dangerous, yet predictable to someone who had spent years analyzing behavior in high-stakes environments. The scientists, too, were more than ordinary researchers. Their discussions hinted at knowledge that went beyond defensive projects, and the cryptic nature of projects suggested ambitions far larger than anyone publicly acknowledged. She noted their mistakes, the pauses in their speech, the patterns of their secrecy. They had underestimated the power of observation, and that was her advantage. Past was not just about skill, it was about survival. She remembered missions where a single misstep could mean death, where one overlooked detail could unravel months of planning. Every night she spent cleaning the base was a rehearsal for understanding the intricacies of human and technological systems alike. The whispers she overheard in labs, the unusual deliveries, the guards, subtle deviations from routine, all of it was critical information. Each observation was a piece of a puzzle that, if solved, could prevent disaster. Yet she also remembered why she had chosen this life of invisibility. The world of espionage had cost her dearly. Friendships, trust, and normalcy had vanished long before she disappeared from the system. She had no family to speak of, no one to anchor her to the ordinary world. This solitude, once bitter, had become a form of strength. She relied solely on her intellect, instincts, and the careful cultivation of invisibility. And now, these skills would be put to the ultimate test. Despite her careful planning, understood the stakes were higher than anything she had faced before. Project was unlike the missions she had executed in the past. Its potential to silence entire communications networks, possibly over entire cities, made it unpredictable and dangerously powerful. One wrong move could trigger irreversible consequences, but this knowledge also provided focus. For the first time in months, felt the adrenaline of purpose, the kind of intense concentration that only came when the stakes were life or death. She spent hours reviewing mental notes, replaying every observation from the night shift. Guard rotations, delivery schedules, lab access codes, everything mattered. She sketched out routines, identified blind spots in surveillance coverage, and considered contingencies. Her apartment became a war room, her solitude a laboratory of strategy. Understood one critical truth: invisibility alone would not suffice. She would need to act at the right moment with precision and, above all, with secrecy. Outside, the desert remained quiet, its vast emptiness a stark contrast to the tension building inside the base. The sky was slowly lightening with the first hints of dawn, but did not leave her apartment. She prepared, mentally rehearsing actions and responses, anticipating every possible scenario. The quiet was deceptive. It masked the urgency of the storm building inside those walls, a storm she was determined to confront. She paused to look at a faded photograph pinned above her desk, a reminder of who she had been before she became invisible, before she assumed the role of the cleaning staff nobody noticed. The woman in the photo had once commanded operations, navigated dangers, and survived missions that others would have deemed impossible. That woman was still within her, ready to surface when the time came. Janitor to some, operative to herself, was ready to step from the shadows when the moment demanded it. As the first rays of sunlight hit the Nevada desert, packed her notebook and prepared for the night ahead. Another shift awaited, another opportunity to observe, to record, and to piece together the truth behind Project. Her past had trained her for danger. Her present demanded vigilance. The base might see her as invisible, dispensable, and harmless, but beneath that ordinary exterior, she was calculating, alert, and fully aware of the ticking clock. This was only the beginning. The invisible worker was ready to uncover secrets that could change everything, and no one in the sprawling labyrinth of the base suspected the storm gathering in the quiet, calculating mind of the janitor who saw everything. Underestimated and unnoticed, was about to step into a confrontation that would test every skill she had spent a lifetime perfecting. The night might end quietly for the base, but for her the work was only beginning, and the consequences would be anything but silent. The following night returned to the base with the silent precision of a shadow. Each step of her journey through the darkened corridors was calculated, every sound analyzed, every movement anticipated. She had memorized the guard rotations, the way cameras swiveled, and the schedules of scientists who labored late into the night. Tonight, her purpose was more urgent than ever. She needed to uncover the full scope of Project, the enigmatic device that had first hinted at disaster. As she wheeled her cleaning cart past Lab 7B, a subtle tension gripped the air. It was almost palpable, like static before a storm. Scientists whispered in hurried, clipped tones, occasionally glancing toward the reinforced doors as if afraid someone might overhear. Paused near the doorframe, pretending to adjust a mop bucket, but her keen eyes and ears recorded every detail. Words like full power test, range expansion, and system failure were exchanged, their meaning cryptic yet chilling. Suddenly, an alarm beeped, not the usual warning that someone might be late or equipment malfunctioning, but a high-pitched, stuttering alert. Lights flickered and then returned to normal. Some of the scientists froze, glancing at monitors, whispering frantic reassurances to one another. His mind raced. She had seen the subtle failures in security and communications before, small anomalies that might have been written off as technical glitches. But now, in combination with what she had overheard, a frightening pattern emerged. Wasn't just experimental, it was dangerous. Recalled the snippets of conversation from previous nights. Project was designed to disrupt communication networks. Phones, radios, even internal alarms could be silenced across broad areas. At first, the implications seemed theoretical, perhaps exaggerated. But now, with the base in chaos over a minor system glitch, the true potential became terrifyingly real. A single miscalculation could create a blackout beyond the base, affecting nearby towns or even larger regions. Her pulse quickened, but her demeanor remained calm. Years of intelligence work had taught her to manage adrenaline, to let observation guide action. She moved closer to the door, careful to remain in shadow. She noticed the way Doctor, the lead scientist, typed rapidly at a terminal, occasionally glancing over his shoulder as though fearing discovery. Guards patrolled the corridor nearby, unaware of her presence. Knew that a single error, even a sound from her cart, could draw unwanted attention. Her invisibility, once again, became her shield. Minutes stretched into an eternity as she lingered near the lab. Her eyes traced diagrams pinned to walls, scribbled notes, and whiteboards filled with coded annotations. Even without full clearance, she began to piece together the outline of the device. A network of synchronized transmitters, amplifiers, and energy nodes designed to interfere with electromagnetic signals. She recognized components that, if mismanaged, could produce uncontrollable effects. Her training kicked in as she calculated worst-case scenarios in her head. The potential devastation was staggering. Suddenly the lights went out. Not a flicker, complete darkness. Panic erupted inside the lab. Monitors froze, alarms failed, and the hum of machinery fell silent. Even the guards outside reacted, their flashlights cutting erratic paths through the shadows. Remained composed, letting her instincts guide her. She had prepared for moments like this. Darkness was an ally. Her senses, finely tuned to sound and movement, gave her an advantage over those floundering in the sudden silence. She pressed herself against the wall, listening. Conversations became whispers, then disappeared entirely as internal radios went dead. She realized the system failure wasn't accidental. Something, or someone, was testing the device's capabilities. The implications sent a chill down her spine. If Safex could extend this far, the upcoming full-power test could be catastrophic. She had to act, but with absolute discretion. One wrong move and she could trigger alarm, or worse, be trapped within the failing systems herself. As the blackout continued, moved carefully along the corridor, her mop and bucket providing cover for her silent advance. She slipped past a guard checking a frozen monitor, blending into shadows as though she were part of them. Her objective was clear: gather evidence, understand the device's potential, and ensure that the world outside the base would know if it was unleashed. This was no longer simple observation. She was becoming an active participant in a dangerous game. In the lab, she noticed the scientists scrambling to reboot terminals. One of them, a young technician named, muttered, "If we don't stabilize the system, the network could collapse entirely." The words confirmed her fears. It wasn't just a test, it was a weapon capable of paralyzing critical infrastructure. Jotted mental notes on how the system operated, the sequence of nodes, the synchronization process, the safeguards, or lack thereof. Every detail was vital if she hoped to prevent disaster. Hours passed in tense silence. Gradually, the lights flickered back on and systems returned to a semblance of normalcy. Scientists sighed in relief, thinking the failure had been minor. Guards resumed their patrols, oblivious to the intelligence silently absorbing every detail. However, understood the gravity of what she had witnessed. The anomaly had proven two things: the device worked, and the consequences of its misuse were catastrophic. She had to uncover the full blueprint before the scheduled full-power test in just 72 hours. Back in her utility closet, reviewed the night's observations. Every detail, the blackout, the conversations, the system failures, was cataloged meticulously in her mind. She began to sketch connections between the elements of project, its potential range, its power output, and the cascading effects on electronic communication. Her analysis revealed something alarming. The current safeguards were insufficient. Even a small miscalculation could extend the blackout well beyond the intended area. It was a ticking time bomb, and the scientists appeared unaware of the true stakes. Also reflected on the personnel. Colonel, the base commander, exuded calm authority, but his decisions suggested impatience with bureaucracy. Doctor, brilliant but single-minded, seemed more focused on technical achievement than ethical considerations. The staff were competent yet dangerously unaware of the broader implications of their work. To them was a project, an experiment, a breakthrough. To it was a potential disaster waiting for a trigger. Her plan began to take shape. Observation alone would not suffice. She needed evidence, documentation, and insight into the device's operation. Yet she had to remain unseen. Every night offered a chance, but time was slipping away. The scheduled test loomed closer, and the base was oblivious to the danger within its walls. Its unique position, as the unnoticed cleaning staff with a trained mind, gave her access no one else could exploit. As the first hint of dawn crept over the desert horizon, wheeled her cart toward the exit. She felt the familiar weight of anticipation. The night had yielded critical insights, but the true test was ahead. Project was not just a theoretical threat. It was real, dangerous, and dangerously close to deployment. Her mind raced with strategies, contingencies, and possibilities. The world outside the base had no idea how close it had come to silence, and it would remain that way unless acted. In her quiet apartment later that morning, she reviewed her mental notes, replaying each moment in her mind with precision. Every observation, every system anomaly, every whispered conversation formed a map of the threat she faced. She had glimpsed the core of Project, and it was more dangerous than anyone at the base realized. Her past as an intelligence operative had prepared her for infiltration, observation, and extraction. But now she faced a challenge unlike any before, preventing catastrophe while remaining invisible. The janitor nobody saw had taken the first step into the shadowy heart of the base's secrets. The next step would require not just observation, but action, and she would have to navigate danger, deception, and the clock itself to prevent a disaster that could reverberate far beyond the walls of the Nevada desert. The discovery of had changed everything. She was no longer a bystander. She was the only one who could prevent the silence from spreading. The night descended over the Nevada desert once more, blanketing the military research base in darkness. Wheeled her cleaning cart through the silent corridors, her every movement calculated, her presence virtually imperceptible. While the guards and scientists were preoccupied with their routines, she moved like a shadow, slipping past security cameras and swaying figures without attracting attention. To the rest of the base, she was just cleaning staff, forgettable, unremarkable, harmless. And that, she thought, was her greatest advantage. Her mind raced as she replayed the events of the previous night. Project, the so-called breakthrough device, was far more dangerous than anyone inside the base realized. The blackout she had witnessed was a test, a demonstration of power that could, if misused, disrupt entire cities. She understood its potential, its mechanisms, and its vulnerabilities, but knowledge alone would not be enough. She needed evidence. She needed proof, and she needed to remain invisible while obtaining it. She moved into the main laboratory wing, her mop and bucket serving as camouflage. Scientists hunched over terminals, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of computer screens. They were engrossed in their work, oblivious to the silent observer in their midst. Every keystroke, every whispered conversation, every adjustment of equipment was a piece of a puzzle was slowly assembling. She noted schedules, routines, and security lapses, small details that would allow her to access restricted areas without detection. Invisible to all, she began to plant microcameras in strategic locations. Tiny devices slipped into corners, under desks, and inside vents, all recording every movement within the labs. She documented shredded documents, rescued bits of discarded files from the trash, and memorized access codes glimpsed fleetingly on screens. Every unnoticed action added to her growing web of intelligence. She had learned over years in intelligence operations that sometimes the most critical work was done in silence, without anyone knowing. The base's personnel were unwittingly revealing everything she needed. Colonel, the base commander, had a habit of leaving sensitive files on unsecured desks when conducting inspections. Doctor's obsession with perfecting the system left him distracted, occasionally murmuring technical details aloud. The guards, confident in their routines, ignored the shadows around them. Each lapse in attention was a treasure trove for her. She collected and cataloged it mentally, storing a detailed map of the base's operations. Hours passed as she moved through the labyrinthine halls. Every moment required vigilance. A single misstep could compromise her cover. Yet, she remained calm. Her invisibility was both a shield and a weapon, allowing her to operate undisturbed while gathering intelligence crucial to averting disaster. Each corridor, each room, and each subtle observation added another layer of understanding. She was no longer merely a janitor. She was a silent agent, navigating the dangerous terrain of a secretive base. In one lab, discovered a partially dismantled terminal, its screen blinking with encrypted lines. She crouched nearby, pretending to mop the floor while she watched. Even without clearance, her trained eyes and analytical mind allowed her to interpret fragments of code, noting the synchronization sequences of the network. This knowledge, seemingly inaccessible to anyone outside the project, was now within her grasp. Every detail mattered. The placement of nodes, the timing of signals, the potential chain reaction if the system went live at full power. despite the growing risk, continued. She knew that time was short. The full power test was scheduled within days, and there was no margin for error. She mapped the guard rotations with precision, noting blind spots in security coverage. She memorized access codes, exit routes, and hidden alcoves. Every unnoticed observation brought her closer to understanding the system and identifying its weaknesses. Her invisibility allowed her to do what no one else could: see the base as it truly was, beneath the surface of routine and protocol. At one point, she overheard the young technician whispering to a colleague about a last-minute modification to the system. "If we don't adjust the feedback loop, the blackout could extend far beyond the testing perimeter," he said. His heart quickened. The potential for catastrophe was real, and no one inside the base fully grasped it. She committed every word to memory, knowing that it might be the key to preventing disaster. Her role was no longer passive. She was now actively preparing to intervene. She moved silently through storage rooms, labs, and corridors, documenting every anomaly. Old maintenance tunnels, rarely patrolled, became her secret pathways. She hid behind crates, ducked beneath pipes, and used shadows as allies. Every action was deliberate, calculated, and silent. To anyone watching, she was nothing more than a cleaning staff member performing her nightly duties. But beneath that mundane facade, she was constructing a mental blueprint of the base's operations, a map that would later allow her to navigate its most restricted areas with confidence. Invisibility extended beyond mere physical presence. She had mastered the art of perception, reading intentions and predicting actions before they occurred. She anticipated guard movements, the timing of security sweeps, and the likely responses of personnel to system anomalies. Her mind worked like a computer, processing countless variables simultaneously. Every unnoticed action, every shadow she moved through, and every subtle observation contributed to a growing advantage, one that could make the difference between preventing disaster and allowing it to occur. Hours blurred into early morning. The base, unaware of her meticulous work, remained oblivious to the silent observer weaving through its corridors, paused briefly in a maintenance closet, reviewing her mental notes. She had gathered enough information to understand the network's critical nodes, the weaknesses in its design, and the behavior patterns of the people controlling it. Her invisibility had allowed her to collect evidence without confrontation, but she knew the most dangerous moments were yet to come. Finally, she reached a quiet hallway near the control center. The hum of servers filled the air, a subtle reminder of the immense power concentrated in this facility. Paused, taking a deep breath. She knew that soon her work would move beyond observation. She would need to act, to navigate deeper into restricted areas, and to confront challenges that would test every skill she possessed. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The invisible worker had become a silent guardian, quietly gathering the intelligence necessary to prevent catastrophe. As the first hints of dawn touched the desert horizon, wheeled her cart back toward the service exit. The base, bustling soon with the day's shift, would never know how much had been accomplished in the darkness. She had gathered evidence, mapped vulnerabilities, and anticipated potential failures, all while appearing invisible to those around her. In a world where perception equaled reality, she had turned invisibility into power, patience into strategy, and observation into a weapon. Exiting into the cool morning air, paused briefly, surveying the base from a distance. It stood imposing and secure, yet beneath its walls and within its corridors, forces far greater than ordinary security measures were at play. And at the center of it all, unnoticed and underestimated, was a single figure whose silence and invisibility might determine the fate of many. The cleaning staff nobody noticed had become the only person capable of seeing the full picture, and the first step toward preventing disaster had been accomplished. The desert night was quiet, almost unnervingly so, as returned to the Nevada military base under the cover of darkness. Every detail from the previous nights replayed in her mind. The blackouts, the hurried whispers of scientists, the subtle patterns of the guards' patrols. Each observation had pieced together a frightening reality. Project was not a mere experiment. It was a weapon with the potential to silence entire cities. And the full power test was scheduled in less than 72 hours. Time was running out, and knew that remaining invisible was only half the battle. Her steps were deliberate as she navigated familiar corridors, her mop cart serving as both a disguise and a tool for blending in. She had mapped every hallway, every hidden passage, and every weak point in security. But now, the stakes demanded more than passive observation. She needed evidence, proof that would expose the project and halt the impending test. The base's personnel, brilliant yet oblivious, believed was safe under the careful watch of the command structure. They had no idea how dangerously fragile the system had become. As she moved toward the central lab wing, recalled a conversation overheard between Doctor and, "If we push it beyond the calculated limits, the blackout could spread uncontrollably," had warned. The words had been casual, almost dismissive in their urgency, but too, they were a dire warning. The test, if executed without intervention, could lead to catastrophic consequences for the surrounding region. She had to act, but she also knew that one mistake could reveal her presence and compromise everything she had prepared. She slipped into a maintenance closet near the lab, crouching behind stacked crates to observe. The hum of servers and the faint glow of monitors painted a surreal picture in the darkened room. Scanned the equipment, memorizing nodes, amplifiers, and control panels that were critical to operation. Her mind worked like a supercomputer, calculating vulnerabilities, identifying weak links, and anticipating potential failures. The device's complexity was immense, yet she had the advantage: invisibility, patience, and experience that surpassed anyone on the base. Hours into the night, she began her infiltration into the core control area. Guards were predictable, their movements following routine patterns that had studied meticulously. Cameras swiveled on pre-programmed routes, leaving blind spots that she exploited with precise timing. Every step was calculated, every shadow an ally. The corridors, once ordinary, became a map of opportunity. She moved silently, slipping past oblivious personnel, collecting fragments of encrypted files and taking mental notes on the sequence of commands necessary to control. A sudden shift in the guards' behavior caused her to pause. One of them had noticed an anomaly in the system, a frozen monitor blinking erratically, and called over a colleague. Froze against the wall, heart steady but mind racing. She had anticipated this possibility. Remaining still, blending with the shadows, she let the guards investigate while she calculated her next move. Patience was critical. Any hasty action could blow her cover and endanger the mission. Inside the main server room, she found the heart of the network. Nodes, amplifiers, and control terminals were laid out in intricate patterns. Crouched near a terminal, pretending to adjust a mop bucket while her eyes scanned critical data. The synchronization sequence, power feedback loops, and potential failure points were all visible. She understood the implications immediately. A single miscalculation could expand the blackout well beyond the test area, affecting the desert towns and possibly even the regional communication grid. The full power test was a ticking time bomb. Knew she had to gather this evidence discreetly. She activated her small, hidden recording device, capturing files and screenshots while avoiding detection. Every detail of the system, every command sequence, every potential fault was stored for future exposure. She also began compiling her mental map of escape routes and security gaps, knowing that confrontation was inevitable. The clock was against her. With less than 3 days until the test, every second mattered. Failure was not an option. As she moved to a secondary terminal, she overheard Doctor muttering to about bypassing safeguards. "We'll need to override them manually," he said. The words chilled. The scientists were willing to gamble with the system, blinded by ambition and curiosity. If these modifications were implemented, the consequences could be catastrophic. She realized that the threat wasn't just technical, it was human. The combination of human error and untested technology made the upcoming test a disaster waiting to happen. Her mind raced through possible strategies. Direct confrontation with or was impossible. She had no clearance, no weapons, and no support. Her advantage lay in stealth and strategy. She would have to intercept the system, collect evidence, and if necessary, manipulate the controls to prevent the test. It was a delicate balance. Act too soon and she would be caught. Act too late and the consequences could be irreversible. Timing, precision, and invisibility were now critical tools in her arsenal. Moving deeper into the control hub, noticed minor security lapses. An unlocked terminal, a misaligned camera, a guard distracted by personal communication. These small errors, unnoticed by the personnel, were opportunities she had meticulously mapped. She exploited each one with careful precision, weaving through the labyrinthine corridors, her movements silent and unseen. She paused periodically, documenting every observation and committing critical details to memory. Each unnoticed action brought her closer to her goal, preventing the test from becoming a catastrophe. Hours passed, and the base remained unaware of the silent agent in their midst, moved with relentless focus, cataloging critical sequences, memorizing key codes, and understanding the system's vulnerabilities. The full-power test loomed, but she had the knowledge to intervene. The only remaining question was when and how to act without alerting the personnel to her presence. Her mind weighed every option, balancing risk against necessity, strategy against timing. Invisibility, observation, and intelligence were now her weapons. Finally, she paused near a terminal containing critical system schematics. Every node, amplifier, and sequence was displayed on the monitor. Began mentally planning her intervention, how to bypass safeguards, disable dangerous sequences, and secure evidence of the system's risks. The challenge was immense, but she was ready. Years of training, experience in intelligence operations, and the meticulous observation of the past nights had prepared her for this exact moment. The race against the clock had begun in earnest. As dawn approached, retraced her steps through the base, exiting into the cool desert air. The base, preparing for its day shift, had no idea how close it had come to disaster. She had gathered the intelligence she needed, mapped vulnerabilities, and anticipated the full-power test's potential failure points. Her invisibility had allowed her to act unseen, her intellect guiding every decision. The countdown had begun, and she was the only one prepared to confront the threat. Back in her apartment, reviewed the night's observations. The system's weaknesses were clear, the personnel's errors evident, and the looming test a ticking clock. She had less than 72 hours to act, to prevent disaster, and to ensure that the dangerous potential of project was fully understood. Her preparation, patience, and invisibility had brought her this far. But the next phase would require decisive action, courage, and the kind of calculated risk that could determine the fate of thousands, if not millions. The janitor nobody saw was no longer just an observer. She had become an active participant in a race against time, silently preparing to confront a technology far beyond ordinary comprehension. The base might see her as invisible, dispensable, and harmless, but she understood the true stakes. The countdown had begun, and she was ready to act. The base was unusually quiet that night, almost as if it sensed the storm gathering within its walls. Moved like a phantom through the dimly lit corridors, every step measured, every breath controlled. Her cleaning cart, now a prop in a dangerous performance, concealed the small devices she carried. Micro cameras, recording units, and digital intercept tools she had carefully stashed over the past nights. The evidence of imminent danger was within her grasp, but so was exposure. She knew that one careless move could lead to discovery and perhaps death. Her approach to the central control wing was cautious. The corridor ahead was lined with glass panels revealing the nerve center of operations. Guards patrolled in predictable patterns, oblivious to the silent presence of a single janitor moving against the current of routine. Had memorized every motion, every glance, every potential blind spot. Years of intelligence work had trained her to anticipate reactions before they happened, and she relied on those instincts now. Then she saw him, Colonel, the man whose presence had loomed over the base with quiet authority, whose decisions had gone unquestioned by all beneath him. He was standing near the main terminal, reviewing system data, his posture rigid, eyes scanning screens for anomalies. To an untrained observer, he was calm, in control, untouchable. He was predictable, a man who believed his authority was absolute but underestimated the person nobody ever noticed. She had to move carefully. Was more than just a commander. He was intelligent, meticulous, and suspicious of anomalies. If he discovered her true identity, that beneath the guise of a janitor lay an operative capable of exposing the entire project, the consequences would be dire. She watched him from behind a support column, observing subtle habits. The way he adjusted his cuff, the slight tilt of his head when scanning the monitors, the cadence of his commands to nearby technicians. Suddenly, the young technician approached. "Colonel, we have a discrepancy in the sequence. It's unusual," he said, hesitation in his voice. Eyes narrowed. He turned, finally spotting in the shadow of the corridor. His gaze sharpened, recognition flashing briefly. But she was already moving, slipping between blind spots with the grace of a shadow. He knew something was off, yet she remained untouchable, the janitor no one truly noticed. In the command room, the systems were preparing for another preliminary test, knew that the time to act was now. The small digital intercept devices she had placed over the past nights began recording critical sequences and data streams. Every command entered, every node activated, every potential point of failure was captured. But it was not enough. His presence added a human variable she had to account for. He could override safeguards, manipulate systems, and detect anomalies if she was careless. Her mind raced through contingencies. If confronted directly, she could feign ignorance, slip into shadows, or retreat using hidden maintenance corridors. But confrontation seemed inevitable, was not a man who tolerated loose ends. And when it came, she would have to be prepared. She silently advanced, staying in shadow, observing his commands, noting the critical nodes he interacted with. Each move was precise, deliberate, rehearsed in her mind countless times. The moment came abruptly. Voice, firm and commanding, cut through the silence. "Who's there?" His eyes scanned the hallway, froze, pressed against the wall. She could feel the intensity of his gaze, the possibility of discovery closing in. For a moment time seemed suspended, each second stretching into eternity. But she relied on training, remaining calm, still, and invisible. His attention shifted, and she continued, inching closer to the terminal with the evidence she needed. His assistant muttered something about a potential breach. The colonel's suspicion grew, his steps deliberate, echoing along the hallway. Pulse remained steady. She had anticipated this scenario and had an escape planned. Yet she also recognized the opportunity. Confrontation could be leveraged. If believed she was insignificant, he would not anticipate decisive action. And she was not merely moving to escape. She was moving to secure the system, to gather evidence, and to prevent the coming disaster. Inside the control room, she finally had a direct view of the network. Amplifiers, nodes, and synchronization panels pulsed faintly under the dim lighting. His attention was momentarily diverted as attempted a manual override. This was her moment. Using subtle, precise movements, she positioned herself behind a terminal, activating her micro-recording device to capture the critical sequences. Every input, every safeguard bypass, every potential failure point was documented. She was invisible, unnoticed, but fully engaged. Then turned, his eyes narrowing directly at her. "Stop, now." The command was sharp, deliberate, froze, weighing options. Retreat could compromise her evidence, confrontation could escalate into violence, but she had anticipated this moment. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped into the light, her posture calm, almost innocuous, her janitorial guise intact. She spoke softly, controlled, "I'm just cleaning." Her voice was steady, betraying nothing of the storm beneath. For a moment studied her. Something flickered in his eyes, a trace of doubt, a hint of recognition. "You," he muttered, disbelief mingling with suspicion, maintained her composure. She had been underestimated, and now she leveraged that underestimation as her shield. Her invisibility had allowed her to observe, record, and anticipate every move in the base. She was no ordinary janitor. She was a trained operative, and she knew every weakness in his plan. His hand moved toward the terminal, perhaps to access critical controls, acted swiftly, subtly intercepting the sequence with a device she had placed days earlier. The system blinked, nodes shifted, and the blackout risk diminished. Eyes widened as he realized the unexpected interference. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice tense. Yet she did not answer. Silence was her weapon. Observation, preparation, and invisibility had allowed her to act precisely when it mattered most. The confrontation escalated as technicians scrambled to understand the anomaly. Barked orders, his authority challenged by a force he had never anticipated. Calm and composed, remained a silent presence, controlling the narrative through unseen manipulation of the system. Every command he issued was anticipated, every reaction predicted. She had turned the tables on the man who believed he controlled everything. Invisibility, patience, and intelligence had become her most potent weapons. Minutes passed like hours. Realized he had underestimated her. His face hardened with frustration and fury. He understood that the janitor he ignored, the shadow in the hallways, was the only person capable of challenging him. Yet even as he searched for control, had secured the data, neutralized critical risks, and positioned herself to expose the project's vulnerabilities. The confrontation was not physical. It was a battle of intellect, strategy, and invisible maneuvering. Finally stepped back, recognizing the futility of direct action. Remained poised, composed, and unobserved in her final movements. The critical evidence had been secured. The system's potential for disaster was documented. The confrontation had proven one truth: she was no ordinary cleaning staff. Underestimation had been her shield, invisibility her armor, and preparation her weapon. The storm had been met and survived, and the race against the full power test continued. As into the shadows of the maintenance corridors, leaving and the technicians confused and off balance, she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The confrontation had been intense, but her skills, patience, and invisibility had allowed her to prevail. The evidence was secure, the system temporarily stabilized, and the next steps, exposing the truth and preventing catastrophe, were now within reach. Outside the base, the desert remained still and silent, a stark contrast to the tension within the walls. Paused for a moment, drawing in the cool air. The confrontation with had tested every skill she possessed, every ounce of training, and every carefully honed instinct. Yet she had prevailed. The invisible worker had become the unseen force that could change the course of events, and she knew that the coming hours would demand even greater courage, strategy, and precision. The night was heavy with tension as moved once more through the corridors of the Nevada military base. Every shadow seemed deeper, every hum of machinery more ominous than before. The confrontation with Colonel had left her more determined than ever. She had secured critical evidence, neutralized immediate risks, and proved that she was far more than the invisible janitor everyone assumed her to be. Yet the ultimate challenge awaited, preventing the full power test before it could unleash irreversible chaos. Had spent weeks observing the base, collecting fragments of data and mapping its every detail. She knew every guard rotation, every blind spot in the security cameras, and every shortcut through maintenance tunnels. This night, all of that preparation would be put to the test. The plan was precise: infiltrate the central control room, access the core system, and create a digital that would prevent the test from activating fully. Failure was not an option. The corridors were empty. Most personnel were asleep, leaving only a skeleton crew monitoring the base's systems. Movements were silent, her presence unnoticed. She approached the central lab where the heart of pulsed with potential disaster. Every wire, terminal, and amplifier was laid out in a complex network, seemingly unguarded, yet deadly if mishandled. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. This was the moment she had prepared for, and there was no room for error. Slipping past the last patrol, she entered the lab. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the exact position of each terminal and amplifier. The core control panel sat at the center, connected to every critical node of the network. crouched behind a support column, pulling out a small device she had built to interface with the system without triggering alarms. Her hands moved with practiced precision, connecting the device to a hidden port beneath the main console. Every command she entered had to be flawless. A single misstep could trigger a catastrophic feedback loop. As she worked, she reviewed the digital map she had constructed over weeks. The network relied on synchronized nodes, each amplifying the others. If even one node was overloaded or misaligned, the energy could ripple uncontrollably, disabling communications across an entire region. This device began to intercept the system's commands, subtly introducing redundancies that would prevent full activation. She was threading a needle through a minefield of technology, invisible and meticulous. Suddenly, a faint sound, a metallic scrape against a vent, made her freeze. A guard was on his way, alerted by an earlier anomaly in the system. His pulse remained steady. She had anticipated this. Ducking beneath a table, she held her breath as the footsteps passed overhead. The guard muttered to himself about a weird hum, then moved on. Her invisibility had shielded her once again, and she returned to her work, redoubling her focus. Hours passed in tense silence. The system began to respond to her interventions. Nodes stabilized, amplifiers aligned, and the digital quietly embedded themselves into the core sequence. Its mental map guided her every action, predicting potential overload points and preemptively neutralizing them. The base remained unaware of the invisible hand averting disaster. She had become the silent guardian, the unseen protector of millions who had no idea what was at stake. But the challenge was far from over. Doctor, ever meticulous and obsessive, had returned to the control room to check on the system. Noted his pattern. He always started at the top left terminal, systematically reviewing the nodes. She had anticipated this and positioned her device to remain undetectable even under close scrutiny. Eyes flicked over the screens, his brow furrowing as he noticed minor adjustments in the feedback loops. "That's odd," he muttered, clicking through sequences. The system was functioning differently, yet perfectly stable. His heart beat steadily. She had managed to introduce a subtle, invisible safeguard that would prevent the test from going live at full power. The critical sequence now required manual override from multiple nodes simultaneously, a safeguard that no single operator could bypass. The potential for disaster had been neutralized without alerting anyone, yet she remained vigilant. The base's personnel were brilliant, resourceful, and persistent. Discovery at this stage could be catastrophic. Then came the final challenge, the countdown. The system, unaware of her interventions, began the preliminary test sequence. Lights dimmed, nodes pulsed, and a low hum filled the room, signaling the device coming online. His fingers flew across the hidden interface, monitoring energy feedback, stabilizing nodes, and ensuring that the she had embedded remained undetected. The hum grew louder, the room vibrating slightly with the energy of the network. She was the only barrier between controlled observation and catastrophic failure. Colonel's voice crackled over the intercom, calling the lab for an unexpected inspection. Remained hidden, heart steady but mind calculating. His presence could disrupt the delicate balance she had engineered. She adjusted her device subtly, masking any anomalies that might alert him. As he entered the control room, inspecting terminals and questioning staff, she remained unseen, invisible, her work silent but effective. Minutes stretched into eternity. The preliminary test reached full activation, energy flowing through the nodes, amplifiers syncing perfectly, yet the held. Lights flickered, machines hummed at full power, but the system remained under control. Monitoring the network scratched his head. "Everything's stable," he said. Frowned, sensing something irregular but unable to pinpoint the cause. Allowed herself a quiet exhale. The test had been neutralized. As the lab returned to normal, slipped away into maintenance corridors, leaving the central control room intact. The base's personnel were none the wiser, convinced that the system's stability was a result of routine adjustments. Yet she knew the truth. It was her intervention, her meticulous planning, and her invisibility that had prevented catastrophe. The silence of the base was a testament to her success. She had turned underestimation into advantage, invisibility into a weapon, and patience into action. Outside, the desert air was cool and calm, contrasting sharply with the tension inside the base. Paused, surveying the horizon. The full power test, a potential disaster, had been averted without a single person realizing the invisible hand that had intervened. Her work was far from over. She still had evidence to secure, vulnerabilities to document, and the remaining question of who could be trusted to understand the true danger of. Yet in this moment, she allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. Janitor to the unobservant, operative to herself, had transformed the impossible into the achievable. She had turned invisibility into power, underestimation into advantage, and patience into salvation. The base went silent, machines humming in controlled stability, personnel unaware of the peril they had narrowly avoided. And in the shadows, remained vigilant, knowing that her work, though unseen, had saved countless lives. The first rays of dawn crept over the desert horizon, painting the military base in a pale, golden light. The night's tension seemed to evaporate with the rising sun, leaving the personnel unaware of the invisible battle that had taken place in their midst. Inside the base, operations continued as usual. Scientists reviewed their data, guards completed morning patrols, and Colonel moved with the authority of a man still convinced he controlled every aspect of the project. Yet beneath the calm, a silent hero had rewritten the outcome of history. Walked the familiar corridors, mop and bucket in hand, blending seamlessly into the morning routine. To anyone watching, she was nothing more than a diligent cleaning staff member, quietly tending to the floors and emptying waste bins. But's mind was far from mundane chores. The previous night's events had left her both exhausted and exhilarated. She had prevented a potential disaster of unimaginable scale, secured critical evidence, and remained undetected by the very people who held the fate of millions in their hands. In her small apartment off base, reviewed the data she had collected. Micro-recordings, intercepted sequences, and detailed mental maps were all compiled into a single, comprehensive archive. Every weakness of project, every lapse in security, and every risk factor was meticulously documented. This information would not be discarded. It was too important. She had to ensure that the world outside the base understood the potential dangers lurking within its walls. Her invisibility had allowed her to act, but the next phase required action in daylight, strategic, careful, and decisive. Back on the base, Colonel convened a morning briefing. The preliminary test had been deemed a success by the unaware staff. Everything functioned as designed, he announced, gesturing toward monitors displaying normal readings. Doctor nodded in agreement, oblivious to the subtle interventions that had stabilized the system. The young technician, still puzzled by the anomalies he had witnessed, remained silent, unsure of how to explain the unexpected stability. Everyone assumed routine operations had prevailed. No one suspected the invisible force that had altered the outcome. His mind, however, was focused on far more than appearances. She had witnessed the true potential of the device's power to disrupt communication networks across vast regions, and the human errors that could trigger catastrophe. Her invisibility had been both shield and weapon, allowing her to act where others could not. Now, she faced a new challenge: ensuring accountability and transparency without revealing herself to those who might misinterpret her intentions. The world needed to know, but the base could not know her identity. Over the next days, she began a careful campaign of evidence dissemination. Anonymous files were sent to trusted authorities, coded messages delivered to investigative journalists, and digital footprints traced to establish credibility without revealing her presence. Every action was calculated to maximize impact while minimizing risk. The network she had created in secrecy began to ripple outward, ensuring that the knowledge of potential dangers reached the right hands. Invisibility had once shielded her physically. Now, it allowed her to operate strategically across digital and bureaucratic landscapes. Inside the base, life continued as usual. Colonel praised his team for operational efficiency, unaware that their perceived success was partially a result of unseen interventions. Doctor and continued their work, their brilliance unchecked but guided unknowingly by the subtle safeguards embedded into the system. The base remained silent, machines humming, alarms dormant and contained, but the invisible hand that had prevented disaster was already moving on, preparing for the next challenge. Reflected on the nature of invisibility and underestimated strength. For years, she had operated in shadows, learning to observe, anticipate, and intervene where others could not. The base had provided her with a perfect stage, brilliant minds, dangerous technology, and the assumption that a janitor could never wield influence. She had transformed that assumption into an advantage, proving that true power often lies in observation, patience, and strategic action. In a world obsessed with recognition, her victory remained unseen, but no less significant. Her thoughts turned to the broader implications of project. While she had prevented the immediate disaster, the device itself remained a potent tool in the wrong hands. Resolved to continue monitoring, to ensure that no one could misuse the technology. Invisibility, she realized, was not just a cloak, it was a responsibility. The knowledge she carried, the insights she had gained, and the evidence she had secured became a silent guardianship, one that would shape decisions far beyond the desert base. Days turned into weeks. The base resumed normal testing schedules, unaware of how narrowly disaster had been averted. Investigators and journalists, guided by discreet interventions, began asking questions that would eventually lead to internal reviews. Slowly, the invisible threads she had woven into the world began to manifest in tangible outcomes: improved safety protocols, stricter oversight, and increased awareness of the ethical implications of powerful technology. The system she had saved from catastrophe now became safer, its potential for harm mitigated by the unseen architect of stability. And yet through it all remained unseen. Colleagues walked past her in the corridors, chatting and laughing, oblivious to the fact that the quiet janitor they ignored had saved countless lives. She smiled quietly to herself, understanding the paradox of her position. The less visible she was, the more powerful her influence. Recognition was irrelevant. Safety, prevention, and strategy were her true rewards. The base went about its routines, machines humming in controlled efficiency, personnel unaware of the storm that had passed through, and the silent hero who had altered its course. One evening, as the desert sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the base, stood on a ridge overlooking the facility. The hum of machinery reached her ears even from this distance, a subtle reminder of the power contained within the walls. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. The past weeks had tested every skill, every ounce of courage, and every shred of intelligence she possessed. She had faced impossible odds, confronted human error, and neutralized catastrophic technology, all while remaining invisible. Janitor, observer, and silent guardian understood that her work was never truly complete. The balance between visibility and invisibility, action and observation, knowledge and discretion would always be delicate. Yet in that moment, she allowed herself a quiet sense of triumph. She had faced danger, prevented disaster, and ensured that the world continued without realizing how close it had come to silence. The legacy of her actions would remain unseen, but it would resonate in safety, in accountability, and in the subtle improvements that would ripple through the base and beyond. As night fell fully, cloaking the desert in deep shadow, turned away from the base and disappeared into the darkness. The wind carried her footsteps softly across the sand, erasing any trace of presence. The base remained silent, humming with machines and unaware personnel. Project, for now, was contained, its risks mitigated, and the world outside remained oblivious to how close it had come to disaster. Invisibility had been her shield, preparation her weapon, and patience her strategy. And in the quiet, vanished, leaving behind a legacy that no one would see, but everyone would benefit from. The janitor nobody noticed had changed the course of events. The base went silent, the desert calm, and the world unknowingly owed its safety to the unseen, underestimated, and unrecognized guardian.